Welcome back. So as programmers, we need a place to write and run our code. This often involves a specialized text editor called an IDE, short for Interactive Development Environment, that also compiles our code for the computer and typically includes other useful functionality for programmers as well. Now in Section 3 of the course, I'll show you how to install and set up PyCharm, which is currently the most popular Python code editor that you can install on your computer. But in the meantime, we'll be using something called Replit, which is a browser-based code editor. Now, browser-based editors in general, and Replit, my favorite in that category obviously, in particular, have a number of advantages over the kinds of editors you have to install on your computer. For one, we can get up and running immediately. And with less time wasted on setup and troubleshooting, we can spend more time learning to code. Also, browser-based editors like Replit are accessible anywhere. Any computer that's connected to the internet can be used to code. And finally, Replit, at least, is free. Now, if you already have PyCharm or another code editor installed, feel free to use it. But I recommend that everyone start with Replit to follow along, at least for this section. As a developer, it's always a good thing to learn to use different tools anyway. So to start using Replit, simply open up a web browser and type in replit.com. Here you'll be taken to the home page where you'll be prompted to either log in or sign up. Now, assuming you don't already have a Replit account, you'll want to sign up. And here you'll just be prompted for all the standard sign-up stuff. Email, password, and all that business. But the good news is, no payments or credit card are required. Now, I trust you to handle this sign-up process, so I'm going to head on over to my little corner of Replit where I'm already signed in. Now, here in Replit, the first thing we'll want to do is create a new REPL. Now, what the heck is a REPL? So a REPL is basically a programming environment running in the cloud that's configured to be able to execute programs in a specific programming language, or in some cases, languages. And we can create one, predictably enough, by hitting this Create REPL button, and then simply selecting or searching for our language of choice from the list that's provided. Now, alternatively, because many people's language of choice is Python, like us, for example, there's even a shortcut to create a Python REPL. This Create Python button right here. But we'll create ours the old-fashioned way, to the extent that anything about configuring a cloud-based code editor could be considered old-fashioned. So after clicking the Create REPL button, I'll simply choose Python. And the next step is to specify a title for our REPL, basically the name we can use to identify it. And I'll go with Python 101 for this. And then I'll simply hit Create REPL. And here we have our Replit programming environment, which is, at least for the purposes of writing and executing Python programs, our own little virtual computer in the cloud. Or, more accurately, some giant server farm in a basement somewhere. Now, there's obviously a lot going on with this interface, and that's because there's a lot you can do in Replit, but we'll keep things extra simple since we're just starting out. So instead of worrying about writing whole programs, we'll learn the basics by executing one line of code at a time. And the best way to do that is in the Python shell. So in the context of programming, the shell, sometimes referred to as the terminal, is a text-based interface that allows you to interact directly with the computer. You can use it to issue programming commands to your computer, at which point the values returned by those commands, if any, will be printed right back to the shell for you to see. In other words, you get immediate feedback on what your code is doing. This makes the shell especially valuable for beginners because it allows you to experiment with code snippets, see their results in real time, and learn from any error messages that are displayed. Now, it's worth noting that while the shell is one way to execute and interact with code, there are other ways to run code as well. Some of these other methods, like Python files, such as the one named main.py we see here, might be more suitable for larger projects or specific applications. But for learning and initial experiments, the shell is a fantastic starting point. So for now, I'll go ahead and close main.py, and I'll also close this tab for the console. So now, to get started with the shell, you'll first want to type Python and then hit the Enter or Return key on your keyboard. So it turns out that you can actually use the shell to communicate with your computer, or our virtual computer in this case, in other ways besides using Python code to do it. So it's necessary to tell our computer that we want to use the shell specifically to run Python code. So with this, we're finally ready to get started. And since we've already tackled quite a bit in this video, let's start with just about the simplest task imaginable: writing out the phrase "Hello World" to the screen. Now, if you didn't already know, printing "Hello World" or variants thereof is kind of a time-honored rite of passage for aspiring programmers. Now, we can do this using Python's print function. So if you haven't programmed before, don't worry too much about a dictionary perfect definition of what function means in programmer speak just yet. Suffice it to say, it's a pre-built piece of functionality built right into the programming language that allows us to perform some task without knowing exactly how that task is being executed at a lower level. Now, in this case, we'll be telling Python to just print a piece of text, and it will hopefully oblige us by doing just that. To start, we'll type the name of the function, print, followed by a pair of parentheses. So when you're using a function, parentheses always come after the function name. These parentheses may look a little odd to you if you don't have a background in programming, or at least using functions in a spreadsheet like Microsoft Excel, but when you're using a function, parentheses always come after the function name. So then, in between the parentheses, we'll just type the text we want to print to the screen, nested inside a pair of quotation marks. We'll get into why those are necessary later on as well. Suffice it to say for now that in Python, and pretty much any other programming language, text values like "Hello World", as opposed to things like numbers, need to be enclosed in either single or double quotes. So I'll go with single quotes, and then I'll just type out "Hello World". And now if I hit enter, Python dutifully prints the message that I passed to that print function. Now I know that's not terribly earth-shattering, but things will get more interesting soon. I promise. Now before we go, just to show how the shell allows you to keep issuing commands and then getting the results of those commands back in a kind of continuous dialogue, let's try greeting our favorite planet in a slightly more casual way. So now I'll just say print, and this time I'll use double quotes instead of single quotes, "Howdy, Earth." And then hitting enter, there's our somewhat more casual greeting to the third rock from the sun. All right, so up next, we'll take our first foray into the nuts and bolts of programming by exploring values and types. I'll see you then.